Let's understand the world a little better. In recent years, we've witnessed the rise of populist leaders across the globe. These often articulate the frustrations of those who feel left behind by economic globalization and technological advancements, widening the chasm between the haves and have nots. With me is Oded Galor, economics professor at Brown University and author of The Journey of Humanity: The Origins and Wealth of Inequality. Udit, let me ask you first, what are your thoughts on the rise of populism and its connection to growing inequality?
Well, I think that the rise of populism is intimately linked, as you suggested, to the rise in inequality. The world has progressed into a stage in which inequality has been magnified, and consequently, there is a certain segment of society, a sizable segment of society, that appears to be deprived, that feels deprived, and this segment of society is in a position to consider alternative policies that could mitigate inequality and perhaps will prevent competition in the context of the type of jobs that these individuals are performing and the type of services that these individuals receive from the government. So I think that when we think about populism, we should think about it more broadly in the context of inequality, and perhaps it will become clearer as we march through the origins of wealth and inequality, how we should think about populism. So perhaps we can return to this question towards the end once we have a better understanding of what brought about the degree of inequality as we see it across the globe today.
What would you say would be the origins or the main causes that now inequality has risen?
Right. So an important element in my book, in my recent book, The Journey of Humanity, is the argument that, in fact, a significant portion of the inequality in the wealth of nations across the globe has to do with forces that operated in the distant past, namely forces that operated hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, and even tens of thousands of years ago, had a significant impact on the evolution of societies and on the divergence in the degree of prosperity that occurred in the past 200 years. And because of that, it suggests to us that if we would like to mitigate inequality across the globe, we would like to design policies that will reduce inequality and will allow less developed economies to converge in terms of their economic prosperity to the more advanced ones, we will have to target these forces that operated in the distant past.
What are these forces and how many are there? Can we list them actually?
Well, so this is related perhaps more broadly to the notion of a theory that I advanced over the years and is known as unified growth theory, that attempts to understand the evolution of human society since the emergence of Homo sapiens in Africa nearly 300,000 years ago. And this theory was not designed purely for theoretical completion. It was designed because of the conviction that much of the inequality across the globe today has to do with forces that operated in the distant past, namely the evolution of human societies in the course of human history led at a certain point, around 200 years ago, into a major transformation in the standard of living. Look at human societies 200 years ago. The standard of living is significantly lower than the one that we see today. In fact, in the past 200 years, we see a 14-fold increase in the standard of living across the globe after near stagnation for nearly 300,000 year period. But at the time of the takeoff from stagnation to growth, some societies are taking significantly earlier than others. Western Europe and their offshoots in North America are taking off as early as the beginning of the 19th century. Others are taking off very recently, and since the takeoff is associated on average with a 14-fold increase in the standard of living, an incredible divergence is emerging in the world economy. So if we focus on the world in the year 1800 and we ask ourselves, what is the standard of living in the most prosperous region of the world, which is Western Europe, in comparison to the standard of living in the least prosperous region of the world at the time, which is Sub-Saharan Africa, the ratio is about 3 to 1. It's a modest ratio. But today, due to this great divergence that occurred in the standard of living, due to this differential timing of the transition from stagnation to growth, an incredible inequality is emerging in the world economy, and the richest region of the world is about 15 to 20 times richer than the poorest region of the world. So an
Wow.
incredible divergence emerged in the world economy in the past 200 years. And when we are attempting to explain the roots of inequality today, naturally, the focal point that occurred about 200 years ago, the point in which some societies are taking off and others are not, is a very important point in order to understand the roots of inequality. Namely, we have to be in a better position to understand why some societies 200 years ago were prepared for the takeoff from stagnation to growth and made this transition, whereas other societies lagged behind. They didn't have the precondition for this takeoff. The takeoff was delayed for 100 years and even 200 years, and as a result of it, an incredible divergence occurred in the world economy. So when we think about these forces, the forces that existed 200 years ago and led into this differential transition, we have to think about historical conditions and prehistorical conditions, namely forces such as geographical factors and human diversity and their impact on the implementation of growth enhancing cultural traits, growth enhancing institutions, and other type of elements such as human diversity that is conducive for economic development.
So it wasn't. I would have assumed, actually, that also the capital that was, even though it was just at a 3 to 1 ratio at that point, uh, that was in Europe, there more than in Africa, for example, that also would be one of the factors leading to more immense growth later on. But it isn't necessarily.
Right. So the notion of capital is an important one, but it's not really a critical one in the understanding of the roots of inequality as we see it across the globe today. As I said, you look at inequality across the globe today and you try to decompose the roots of this inequality, it appears empirically that nearly 90% of the variations in inequality across the globe today can be traced to the forces that I mentioned: geographical factors, human diversity, institutions, cultural characteristics, and the impact of colonialism. Additional factors such as capital accumulation, etc., a byproduct of this process of development. They are not part of the foundations of the inequality.
Uh, where are the trends going now? It's spreading more and more. It's becoming more and more unequal. The world that is still.
So, if you observe the past 200 years, it appears initially that the world economy is diverging in a very significant fashion. But in the past few decades, we see some forces of convergence in the sense that we see that less developed societies are growing much more rapidly than developed ones. They are benefiting from the fact that they are subjected less to diminishing returns, and we see some forces of convergence. But overall, we look at a big picture of the past 200 years, an incredible divergence with some mitigation that is occurring in the past few decades.
But when you would try, I know that it is hard to project into the future, how the divergence will look like then. Do you think the gap will narrow or will it widen?
So my projection about the future is that in fact we will see a gradual convergence across the globe, and the reason is multifold. So first, we see the diffusion of technologies from more advanced societies to less advanced ones. And this is in the form of medical technology that permits individuals to be healthier and as a result of it to invest more in education than otherwise. This is partly in the form of transportation technology that permits the world to be more connected and as a result of it reduces the penalty of geographical isolation. It is partly in the form of information technology revolution that makes the world more that makes the world more globalized, and as a result of it, permits individuals to realize what type of traits are conducive for prosperity and development in the world as a whole. So this is another force that is operating towards convergence. If I think about the years to come, I think that we will see gradually the adoption of growth enhancing institutions. We will see gradually the adoption of cultural traits that are growth enhancing, say long term orientation, the ability to plan for the future, greater amount of trust, etc. A lot of elements that are important for human interaction and economic prosperity. And so overall, I think if I think about the fundamental forces, I expect these fundamental forces to be diffused over time. And as a result of it, I would have to make a projection about how the world would appear 50 years from today. We will see greater convergence than we've experienced in the past few decades.
How do you think now now up and coming technology like automation and AI will play into that?
Right. So this is the artificial intelligence is naturally a critical force in the way that humanity will operate in the coming decades and perhaps beyond. And let me take a step back, and it will be clear how the AI is fitting in. So for a long period of time, in the past, I would say a few decades, economists are generating this dismal prediction about the fate of technological progress and the fate of prosperity across the globe. So the concern is that, in fact, the world is experiencing a rapid decline in population growth. Some societies, in fact, are experiencing an absolute decline in the size of the population, such as China. And the question is whether, in fact, can sustain the pace of technological progress in the absence of population growth. So some people made a prediction that, in fact, the engine of technological progress in the past was the size of the human population and the growth of the human population. And since the size of the human population will reach a plateau and perhaps will decline, then perhaps we will see some sort of technological stagnation, and as a result of it, decline in human prosperity over time. I was not a proponent of this argument for many reasons. The first one is that I think that when we think about technological progress, the scale of the population is very important. But in addition, the quality of the human population, the education of the human population is equally important. And typically, the size of the human population is often coming on the account of the quality of the human population. And as a result of it, when we think about future technological progress, we should think about quality adjusted size of population as opposed to simply the scale of the population. And in this respect, my conjecture prior to the emergence of artificial intelligence was that, in fact, we're not bound to hit this upper ceiling. In fact, technological progress will continue to be maintained because the decline in population growth will permit parents to invest more in the education of their children. And as a result of it, the quality of the human population will more than compensate for the reduction in the size of the human population, and technological progress will continue to march forward. But in fact, my argument is being enhanced even further, in the sense that we reach a stage in which there is a replacement for the scale of the population, which is artificial intelligence. So we reach a stage in which, in fact, we can replace many human tasks by technology. And as a result of it, we can use technology to produce additional waves of technological progress. So the fact that the size of the human population will decline over time, perhaps, hopefully, certainly from the viewpoint of the environment, this would be an incredible benefit to have smaller population and smaller pressure on the environment. So if the size of the human population will decline, and as I said, the quality will adjust accordingly, and in addition, artificial intelligence will assist human to produce more of the same, and perhaps much more than that, basically the scarcity of the human population will no longer be a bottleneck, and we can reach a tremendous amount of economic growth that in fact is perhaps inconceivable for most economists. But when economists are thinking about the growth process and economic growth in the past 200 years, 150 years, they basically focus on the growth of Western Europe and say the United States, growth of about 2% per year since 1870 to the present. And this is a remarkable growth rate. But as I said, in the past few decades, economists started to talk about the productivity decline, that perhaps we are facing a new era in which productivity will decline and this 2% growth rate will not be sustained. And as I said, asymptotically, we'll move into a society in which the growth rate will disappear entirely. And my conjecture, as I said, to begin with, that we can sustain more than 2% growth rate because of the increase in the quality of the population, the increase in the education of the population. But now with artificial intelligence, I think that we are up for a huge surprise. I think we are bound to enter into a regime in which the growth rate will be non-comprehensible to many economists. And this is to a large extent frightening in the context of, say, the Federal Reserve policy regarding interest rate. Because the Federal Reserve, when they observe the economy and they see that the economy is, say, growing at 4 or 5% per year from time to time, they are agitated by it. They feel that, in fact, this is a non-sustainable growth rate that is bound to generate inflation, and they try to tame it by an increase in interest rate. And this would be a foolish mistake in the sense that we are moving into a new era in which the models of the Federal Reserve Board are not well equipped to deal with. And as a result of it, they don't fully comprehend the fact that we are moving into a new regime in which, as I said, the growth rate can be incomprehensible. And as a result of it, artificial attempts to tame it with higher interest rate is just going to be detrimental for no good reason. So overall, as I said, I think artificial intelligence will assist humanity to generate an incredible amount of prosperity and can really alleviate the notion of scarcity in a tremendous fashion.
But what does
Having said that, artificial intelligence will come with a huge price, which is an incredible increase in inequality. And unless the society will be fully aware of these consequences, we will face other type of issues, such as the issues that we started with, namely incredible inequality, certain segment of the population that feels deprived, and as a result of it, the rise of political extremism, social unrest, etc. So again, artificial intelligence is bound to increase to improve prosperity on average in a tremendous fashion. But as I said, this will not be evenly distributed unless the society will be proactive and will try to balance the gains from artificial intelligence.
And you mean this globally as well as nationally, right?
Yes, indeed.
Wow. Do you think there's any way to, or do you have any idea for a policy or anything that could counteract that?
So one thing, so when we think about inequality, and that's, so we talked a little about, so when I refer to my book, The Journey of Humanity, I was referring to the evolution of inequality across nations. But when we think about inequality within a nation, inequality within individuals, say within the American society or within the European society, or any other society, naturally, inequality is a byproduct of the fact that we live in a market system that rewards productive traits in a differential way. If we have certain traits that are rewarded by the market, we will be richer than otherwise. And since we are not identical, individuals differ in their productive traits, and different technologies complement different type of traits. Inequality is an inevitable byproduct of this heterogeneity productive trait on the one hand, and the fact that we live in a market economy that rewards productive traits differentially. But so inequality, as I said, is there to stay in the sense that if we would like to live in a world in which people are faced by proper incentives to make the proper effort, we would like to compensate individuals in a way that will induce them, in fact, to extract the proper effort. And some inequality is very important for a lively operation of the economy. But there is one important distinction that should be made. The bottom part of the income distribution, or the share of income of the bottom part of the income distribution, is critical for the ability of individuals that are born into these layers of society to properly invest in themselves, to properly invest in education, to properly invest in entrepreneurship activities, etc. And unless we're sure that individuals at the bottom end of the distribution have proper amount of income, in fact, inefficiency will be generated by great inequality. So when we have some inequality, it provides an incentive, but the incentive is relevant for the segment of society that is not trapped with a low income trap that prevents proper investment in education and entrepreneurial activities. And as a result of it, the society ought to be proactive in designing redistribution to assure that the lower segment of society is supported properly so as to assure that individuals in society face the proper equality of opportunities. So the key word is, in the end, equality of opportunities. We would like every member of society to have equal opportunity, because with equal opportunity, we have the best match between talents and occupations. You're talented, regardless of your background, you will be properly assigned to a particular task and you will fulfill your potential. In the absence of equality of opportunities, some individuals are trapped in poverty traps and they cannot emerge from these poverty traps. As I said, so the first mission that society has to take upon itself is to assure equality of opportunities, to assure that, in fact, there is no discrimination, and initial conditions or initial level of income does not affect the ability of individuals to invest in themselves and to fulfill their potential. Once we have that, then the inequality that will emerge is at least a fair inequality, in the sense that it really reflects differences in the productive traits across individuals. And as I said, the match of these productive traits and the technological environment. But still, whether it's fair or can be perceived as fair doesn't imply that we should not be engaged in redistribution. Again, there will be a certain segment of society that will be marginalized by certain technologies, and we have to be more open to support this population. And this becomes very important in the context of AI, because as I said, AI will displace large number of workers, at least in the short run. In the long run, there will be new occupations that will emerge, and individuals will sort of complement the new technology in a proper fashion. But for a few decades, we will see great amount of displacement of certain individuals by the technology. And this, but at the same time, there will be an incredible prosperity that will be generated. And as a result of it, we have to use this prosperity to provide a minimal level of income to all members of society. I mean, if you're simply unfortunate that you don't have at the moment the productive traits that are complementary to the technological environment, it doesn't mean that society ought to be cruel towards this individual. On the contrary, society has to be receptive of these limitations and compensate individuals and understand that this is not going to generate adverse incentives, because in fact we are going to live in a society that some individuals would have all the incentive in the world to try to work and to match the technology, but the technology will simply have no room for the type of skills that they will have. So this is what I have in mind.
You just said that some inequality in at least our system comes in our incentive system comes naturally and is therefore, I think one can say, good. Is it? Would you say there's also a good factor to inequality existing? So maybe concentrated wealth or leads to certain possibilities.
Right. So when we think about inequality and economic prosperity, as I said, I mean, I don't. I mean, the important element to realize that there are two dimensions to it. One of them is how proper compensation and proper incentive are generating the proper incentive for individuals to perform well and to accumulate the relevant traits for the production process. So this is very important. But as I said, there is another dimension, which is the effect of inequality on the inability of individuals or some individuals in society to invest in themselves. And this has to be mitigated. So it's not a universal approach in the sense that when we think about the bottom end of the distribution, society ought to be very generous because this is a place where poverty traps can emerge in the sense that parents that are uneducated will give birth to children that will be forced to be uneducated because of adverse initial conditions. So we have to resolve this issue. We have to provide sufficient resources to assure that every individual in society can be properly educated. But the fact that there is some inequality in society by itself is not an issue. Now, whether what is my view about the emergence of incredible billionaires, that's a different story, particularly when we think about the segment of society that is lagging behind. I think that these billionaires can be taxed heavily without affecting their incentives and allow those members of societies that are unable to accumulate properly to participate in the production process and to participate in society. So in this respect, I'm certainly receptive to the idea that one has to redistribute from incredibly rich individuals towards the bottom end of the distribution.
When we look at different countries, and I think there are indices for inequality that try to measure these, like the Gini coefficient. I think. Um, what are consequences? What comes together with very equal societies and with very unequal societies?
Right. So when we think about unequal societies, and as you said, typically we measure it with the Gini index. So there are sort of certain regions of the world that appear to be rather unequal. Some societies in Latin America, Brazil and Colombia in particular, and some societies in Africa, particularly in the southern part of Africa. Then, in the comparison between the Americas and Europe, it appears that Europeans are more egalitarian than the Americans. Now, when we think about egalitarian societies in comparisons to more unequal societies, so if we make the comparison between the United States and Europe, and we see the sort of the welfare state, if you wish, on the one hand, and perhaps and the and we see the sort of a more competitive system in the U.S. The more competitive system in the US is generating more incentive, more prosperity, more resilience in times of economic crisis. And the more humane, if you wish, system that exists in Europe is permitting individuals to live more comfortably, perhaps less prosperous. I mean, on the average prosperity is lower than what is prevalent perhaps in the US, but again, they are compensated by certain safety nets that are part of society that are quite important. So it's really a matter of your value system, where you would like to be, and what type of society matches your value system. And there's some trade-offs that are associated with it. If you live in a purely capitalistic society, probably on average you will be more prosperous. But if you fail, you will pay for it more dearly. And if you live in a society that is more humane, more um, that provides greater safety nets, on average, prosperity will be lower, but in case of failure, you will still be in a relatively reasonable position. So these are the trade offs typically.
And now looking at the society as a whole, can we see if, for example, more unequal countries maybe have greater economic growth or the opposite?
I think that there is a debate about the relationship between inequality and economic growth. I don't think that there is a consensus in the economic profession about this relationship. I mean, traditionally, in the past, I would say 50, 100 years ago, there was a sense that perhaps inequality is very good for economic growth because inequality can contribute to the concentration of resources in the hands of very few. Those individuals will save more, will accumulate more, and this will be good for economic growth. But as I said, this was sort of the perception of the past. Then there was the realization that, in fact, the main engine of economic growth is not physical capital accumulation, it's human capital accumulation, education. And for education, in order to have proper education, you need to have relatively equal distribution of income across the society, because it's not one individual, it's not Jeff Bezos that is investing in his own wealth alone. In order to generate proper education, it's not enough that one person will invest in herself. You need wide investment in society. And as a result of it, equality becomes more important for human capital formation. So the perception or the viewpoint that is more prevalent today is that during the period in which physical capital accumulation was the main engine of economic growth, inequality was correlated with economic prosperity because it propelled physical capital accumulation. But at the moment that education or human capital became the main engine of economic growth, in fact, equality started to be much more important. And as a result, because it permitted wider participation in the process of accumulation that is necessary for investment in education. So again, it depends very much in which stage of development you are, and it depends very much. So there is no general perception about the relationship between inequality and economic growth. It depends very much on the stage of development in which each country is. those countries that are still in early stages of development, in which physical capital formation is very important, will see a positive correlation between inequality and growth. Those societies that moved into the stage in which education is the main engine of economic growth will see the opposite relationship.
That is super interesting. Education being the major factor there, because I come from a generation now that, or at least for me, it is true that I think I have learned more from the internet than from formal education. And the internet, I think, is a great equalizer in a way, as that not everybody, of course, but a lot of people have access to courses on YouTube, for example, from Harvard, introductory courses, or MIT. I mean, people can listen to this podcast, listen to you and your insights, and I wonder how that will change inequality in the future.
Right. So when you asked me before about convergence in the wealth of nations across the globe, so I mentioned that the diffusion of technology is critical in the process of convergence. So if you would have, we would have this discussion 40 years ago, I would be skeptical about convergence. But given the fact that information technology is indeed bringing frontier technology and frontier knowledge to every individual across the globe, this is an incredible force of convergence because, as you said, you can be exposed to frontier knowledge, to frontier learning in any place across the globe, whether you're here in the United States or you are in a remote place in sub-Saharan Africa. So if you're motivated and you would like to acquire knowledge, the knowledge is there on the web, and it's accessible, and to a large extent it is free. I think this is an incredible force that will contribute greatly to the convergence across nations. I mentioned before the diffusion of medical technology, the fact that immunization is prevalent across the globe, and as a result of it, life expectancy is higher than otherwise. Child diseases are eradicated across the globe, and as a result of it, people can invest in themselves without fear of early death or fear of inability to concentrate or to attend schools. As I said before, if once there was a concern about being geographically isolated and as a result of it being deprived from trade and cultural exchange with the rest of the world. Again, transportation technology allows us to fly to any corner of the world. Transportation technology or transportation becomes cheaper and cheaper in relative sense. And as a result of it, again, the world becomes a large village. And then information technology and access to knowledge is really first order, not only in order to acquire knowledge per se, but even in order to acquire those traits that are very critical for economic success. So you can view the elements that are critical for economic success, and you can imitate them quite clearly and quite easily by watching those individuals that are ultimately having these proper traits that are complementary to the technological environment.
I want to ask you about one more trend, I'd say, that is occurring and might change inequality in the future. How do you think about climate change in regards to inequality globally, meaning now?
Right. So climate change is probably the most significant challenge that humanity has faced, and certainly, I mean, if some people had the ability to deny the forces of climate change a decade ago, it becomes harder and harder to deny the fact that we are living in a time of change, and we have to take actions to mitigate the damages that we create to the environment in which we live. And climate change indeed can be associated again with another trigger of inequality, and because climate change will affect certain regions of the world more than otherwise. And those individuals that will have the resources to first purchase properties that are shielded from this type of environment, or protect their belonging and their property from this type of environment, or simply individuals that will be more mobile due to their resources, will be able to shield themselves from these catastrophes, where others will be subjected to it more severely. So certainly poorer nations will suffer more than otherwise, and we will see in this respect greater inequality. But as I said, even within a nation, I suppose that some individuals will be able to shelter themselves better than otherwise based on wealth. But this will be an additional force that will contribute, unfortunately, to the inequality across the globe.
Hmm. I don't know if you know him, Scott Santens. He's a political activist for unconditional income in the U.S. I spoke with him a few weeks back, also on this podcast, on one episode about unconditional income, and I asked him if he had some questions for you when we will do the interview, and he actually did have two questions, so I will read them now to you. What do you think, Oded, would be the potential impact on gun violence in the US after UNI severely reducing inequality?
Again, so what will be the potential impact of reduction in inequality on gun violence? That's the question.
What is your vision for? Oh no, sorry. What do you think would be the potential impact on gun violence in the US after UNI severely reducing inequality?
Right. So certainly inequality is a source of social unrest. It's a source of conflict, and conflict has different manifestations. Some of the conflict is manifested itself in peaceful demonstrations, some of them in harsher demonstration, and some of them are simply in the context uh, of violence in the street that is associated with gun violence. So my prediction will be a straightforward one. The reduction in inequality will certainly mitigate gun violence in the US, unambiguously.
Then, in general, what do you think of universal inheritance or universal income? Maybe as two separate
Yeah,
questions.
so I was alluding to it, and I think we are so there is always an issue of scarcity, and the question is how do you bring resources to provide this type of income? But as I said, I mean, in light of the potential windfall from artificial intelligence and the fact that it will be unequally distributed, I think that providing a subsistence level of being for every individual in society will be very prudent. And as I said, in the absence of, I mean, the fear typically has to do with incentives, whether this type of policy will deprive individuals from making the proper incentives to enter into the labor market and to invest in themselves and ultimately to contribute to society. But I think that given the fact that the technology that we are referring to is going to marginalize large number of societies in order to assure social cohesiveness and in order to prevent social unrest, I think that the prudent policy is in fact some sort of universal policy that will provide wealth to individuals simply by the fact that they're members of society. And this will be sufficient to sustain themselves, and perhaps it can be structured in a way so as to assure that incentives are not compromised. But as I said, at the moment, this should be a secondary consideration, because we are fully aware of the fact that this is the AI is such a powerful technology that it will displace many individuals that would like to be part of the labor market, but ultimately will be displaced by the technology. And consequently, I think it's our responsibility morally, but beyond that, it's correct and wise economically. It will reduce social unrest and it will provide uh, elements of social cohesiveness that is so important for the healthy operation of any society or any economy.
I'm assuming, since you're a professor at Brown, that you live in the US. So, in the US, what have you seen the recent past as the most promising policy solution to reduce inequality?
I think that unfortunately, in the time period that I was in the US, I'm not a US born individual. I live in the US, but certainly in the past few decades, I did not see any major initiative that I consider very important for sort of creating equity and equality that is healthy for the society. I think that one initiative that perhaps was important in this dimension is the creation of some sort of a national health care. Uh, but this was done, yeah, so this is perhaps the sort of the initiative that is getting closest to what I would like ultimately to see. Again, provided that it's not really intervening with the operation of free markets and the provision of proper health services to all individuals in society. But in general, this is the closest policy to a policy that can mitigate inequality and provide some sort of what I defined before as equality of opportunities, assuring that people are healthy enough to invest properly in themselves and in their children and ultimately be functional members of society.
Before we go on to our second segment, some rapid fire questions, I would like to ask you: is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't, or anything else that you would like to add?
So I would just perhaps, not out of advertisement for my book, but my book, The Journey of Humanity, is really providing a perspective that can enlighten the young generations uh, about the hurdles that humanity has been facing in the course of human history, and why perhaps in light of the journey of humanity we should be a little more optimistic about what the future is about to bring. The sense that, the book to a large extent is making the point that humanity has faced incredible challenges over 300,000 years of history, and humanity managed to prevail and to maintain its course and perhaps to make the course even more vigorous over time. And in this respect, many that read my book view the book as sending a relatively optimistic message about what the future will bring. So I would certainly urge youngsters to read the book. It's a jargon-free book. It's not based on any pre-knowledge of economics. Any person that has completed a good high school would be able to read and benefit from it. It has incredible amount of interesting anecdotes, but beyond that, a really a unified approach to the evolution of society that is ultimately shedding important light on, as I said, the origins of wealth and the origins of inequality across the globe.
I will put that down a link in the description, so you can go check it out. Then, if you are ready, if you are truly ready, we can go over to the rapid fire questions. For these, I would ask you to, if you could answer in around 2 to 3 sentences, so that they are really rapid fire. And yeah, are you ready?
Yeah, I hope so.
Okay. First one. Imagine you had a big billboard, let's say on Times Square, everybody would see it. What would you put on it?
Well, so I would put what I placed recently in the signature of my email, which, and I will read it to you. So the statement is: empower your descendants with a world that transcends your ancestors, um, your ancestors' legacy. Again, empower your descendants with a world that transcends your ancestors' legacy. So this would be my
Like
um,
that. Do you have a favorite quote?
sorry.
Do you have a favorite quote?
Yeah, so this would be my favorite
Oh,
quote.
oh, that is a quote. By whom is it?
No, it's favorite quote by someone else. That's a quote from myself. But yes, I do have a favorite quote, and in fact, it's paraphrasing the quote of Albert Einstein. And this is about the virtues of theories. And Einstein, I mean, it's a bit of a paraphrasing, said that a good model, a good theory, should be as simple as possible, but not simpler. This is rather profound. It suggests to us that we really want to understand the world, if we want to theorize about the world, then we have to create a structure that is as simple as possible, but at the same time not simpler in the sense that we should maintain a healthy distance between assumptions and predictions. And this is sort of something that guided me as a theorist in my own research.
A controversial opinion. I believe what almost nobody else does.
Um, I'm not sure how controversial this opinion is these days, but I do feel, as a person that works in the academic world in the past decades, that we are entering into an era of censorship that reminds me a little bit of the period of the Inquisition in the Middle Ages, in the sense that there are topics of research that are considered illegitimate, and there is great amount of censorship and scrutiny that is really not healthy for academic research. I view some sort of oppression in the academic circles that I hope will subside in the coming years and decades. But at the moment, we are at the height of this oppression. As I said, at the moment, it's not. I think that many people share my viewpoint, but I think that hopefully we will see some actions that will allow the academic freedom to be restored, because this is critical for scientific development.
Yes. Um, what is the biggest problem leading to inequality?
So, in the coming decades, as I said, it will be artificial intelligence that will displace a large number of individuals and will generate inequality. But beyond that, it's the fact that it's not a problem. It's the fact that we are different. And as a result of it, we have different productive traits. And we live in a market system that rewards trade differentially. And inequality is a byproduct of it. But as I said before, if we wish, we can mitigate it. That's a matter of policy. We can redistribute income and assure that more equality will be prevalent in society if we wish to do so.
What would you have liked to know when you were 20?
So that's a difficult question, and probably I would not send any messages from Oded of today's world to Oded in the 20s, because I think that my past, this trial and error and experimentation, was very important for the way that my brain was formed and ultimately for my intellectual development. So, in some sense, I wouldn't like to provide the clue to myself in the age of 20 that will allow me to step on a particular path, because it would deprive me from all the alternative path that I took that I think ultimately helped me to form myself as I am formed today. So in fact, I would not send any messages to myself in the age of 20. I will allow myself to live the same life of experimentation and natural evolution.
Do you have a message for a 20-year-old person that would like to go into academic field?
Yes, I think the main message is that the academic field is just fascinating, and I think that I cannot envision a more intriguing and a more rewarding career than the academic one. And if you do step into the academic career, I think it is really important to focus on important questions. So there is a tendency in science to ask narrower and narrower questions. This is true universally. People becomes great specialists on the account uh, of basically preventing large knowledge creation. And I think that at least my insights and my view based on my research career is that don't allow yourself to over specialize. I think it's important to be a specialist to make an impact, but at the same time, maintain your connection to the field as a whole, to other fields, because ultimately this will allow you to ask the most meaningful questions that can be asked down the road.
Wow, that's a good. What's your newest, biggest insight?
So the moment I'm exploring a new concept, it's the concept that I defined as intrapersonal diversity. So how diverse is your mindset and what allows some individuals to have more diverse mindset than others. And I'm trying to understand whether the fact that your parents are potentially coming from very distinct backgrounds is affecting your mindset in a way that is ultimately make you more productive. And again, I'm trying to understand the trade offs that are associated with diverse mindset. On the one hand, diverse mindset is more conducive for creativity, flow of ideas, and cross fertilization within your brain. But on the other hand, diverse mindset may generate some sort of chaotic thought process that prevents you from focusing on a particular task. And part of what I'm trying to do is to quantify these two effects. And I'm focusing on individuals. I'm looking at their ancestors. Say one person is coming, say a person that is residing today in the US and has a parent from Ireland and another one from Germany, as opposed to another one that has a parents from Ireland and from China. And how these diverse backgrounds is affecting the individual mindset in a way, as I said, that on the one hand, perhaps the individual is much more creative, but on the other hand, perhaps the individual is dysfunctional. So taking these two elements into account and trying to see what is the level of cultural distance between your parents that is really conducive for a productive mindset. So it's an entirely uncharted territory that I think that can lead into tremendous insights.
That sounds really interesting. If you have any, if you find anything there, then I think we'll have to do another talk. um, how would you spend $10 billion to make the world a better place?
Well, so as I said before, when I think about the adverse effect of inequality, it has to do with the inability of individuals at the lower segment of the society to properly invest in themselves and in their children. So I would take these resources and I would invest it both in the education and the health of individuals that would otherwise be underinvesting in these elements.
How can every one of us help tackle inequality?
So here again, I would like to emphasize the fact that inequality is not pure evil. In the absence of inequality, we saw, how the Soviet system collapsed. So it's not that we would like to live in sort of a world that appears or is pretending to be overly equal, because then incentives will not be there and prosperity will decline tremendously. So first we have to take into account, as I said, that inequality is an inevitable byproduct of the fact that we are different from one another and we live in a competitive system. Having said that, as I said, we need to mitigate inequality initially by assuring equality of opportunities. We really have to assure that each member of society has an equal chance in succeeding in life. If we do so, we made an incredible step towards inequality that is more tolerable, and then, of course, we can redistribute based on our tastes.
But how can one individual help getting that done?
I don't think that it's in the hands of any single individual. I think these are big issues. Naturally, this has to be voted by the society. I mean, the redistribution is a matter of choices of the society as a whole. It cannot be imposed by a single individual. So but in the short run, as I said, one can raise compelling argument, scientific argument, in favor of first equality of opportunities and in favor of redistribution for the lower segment of societies that would otherwise be trapped in what we define as poverty trap that will prevent these individuals from being well-functioning members of society. So only thing that we can do proper research, we can advance this research, we can advocate this research, and convince policymakers to implement these policies for the well-being of society.
Thank you, Galor. It was really interesting. If you want to know more about Oded Galor and his works, check out his book. As I said, I'll link it down in the description. The Journey of Humanity and the Origins of Wealth and Inequality. Thanks again. Do you have any last words?
No last words. Thank you very much. It was my pleasure, Timon.
Thank you as well.